Our guest today is current trainer of six-time world champion Roy Jones Jr., former lightweight champion Paul Spadafora, and numerous world champions, along with up-and-coming light heavyweight talent Keonta Irving. He's without question one of the absolute top trainers in the sport today. Welcome to Title Unboxed, World-Class Boxing's Tom Yankello.
Welcome to Title Unboxed. With more than 40 years of experience in the fight game, our host, Doug Ward, will be covering every corner of the ring as we get comfortable between the ropes. We'll talk with both the lesser-knowns and the legends, discuss boxing's rich history and current state of the game. We'll also look at today's latest innovations, equipment breakdowns, and insights you won't uncover anywhere else. Join us now as we take a look inside Title Unboxed.
Tom, it's great to have you on here.
Doug, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
I want to jump right into it because I know we've got a lot to talk about, and you've got a lot of interesting knowledge to share. So I just want to get right into the meat of it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Now I know you started as an amateur fighter yourself. Do you remember how you got into the game?
Correct.
And like how many fights you had and all the details?
Right. Well, I've been doing this basically since I was a baby.
Yeah.
Both of my families were boxing families. My grandfather, my mother's dad, was a military champion, and he boxed in the military. And my dad's brother was also in the military, and he boxed. So they were both big, brought boxing to me as a young age. My uncle, my grandfather, two boxing families came together basically. And when I was 5 years old, the first thing I ever really remember was not football, basketball, or baseball. I remember boxing. They would take me to boxing matches or always have it on TV. And so it was the first sport I was ever introduced to. So it's the first thing I ever remembered. And so they started working with me. They worked with my grandfather, my uncle really started working with me, and my dad as well, even though he never really boxed, but he was always around my uncle and he loved the sport. So those three basically were the ones that work with me. My dad actually built us a nice little basement boxing gym, where we had a little area for a ring, and then we had double end bag, speed bag, heavy bag, a little slip the maze ball, so he put a little basement gym for me. And I used to train with my uncle, my grandfather. And then, because where I lived, we were like an hour away from Youngstown, Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And we were an hour away from Pittsburgh where I lived. And so they trained me more or less. And then we would go to gyms in either Youngstown or Pittsburgh to spar. And so I started young, and I was like 5 when I put the gloves on. When I started fighting, I was actually competing. I was probably 11, 12 years old. They had trained me for a while, and I really never competed at that young age. Those guys believed in me working on the game, but never really competing until I got a little older. Mm-hmm. But they were always training me, So I basically had 5 or 6 years of training before I really got to fight.
That's a leg up.
And then yeah, leg up for sure. So I started off real well, and then I never got a chance to fight as an open class fighter, as an elite fighter, because I ended up suffering shoulder injuries. Mm-hmm. I had 4 shoulder surgeries from the time I was 16 to 20 years old.
Yep.
I have what you call it, that people say it's double jointed, but I was with lax ligaments in my shoulders and my elbows. Yep. So my shoulders would constantly pop out of place, and I had probably like 25 dislocations in my teenage years in my right shoulder, and like a handful of my left ones and my left one. And I ended up getting 4 surgeries, 1 in my right one and 3 in my left, like 4 consecutive years from the time I was 16 to 20.
Oh, wow. So
I from the time I was, like I said, 11, 12 years old to the time I was 16, I probably had a few dozen amateur fights. So, that just really put a damper on what, me trying to compete as a boxer. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't know what I was going to do with my passion for boxing. I loved it, but I had the idea that my whole life that I was going to be a fighter. And then I had everybody telling me, "Oh man, you should be a trainer. You got a ton of knowledge and you love the sport. You should go into training." So in 1991, the gym that I'm in right now was opened by somebody else, and they had it for 2 years. And I started to go down there and started to help them train. That was what I started to try to help kids train. I was 20 years old. I remember the first time I went to that gym, I was in a sling from my fourth shoulder surgery, and I was working, trying to teach kids and trying to work with kids at the time. And then 2 years later, I had helped at that gym for 2 years. And then 2 years later, I opened up my own gym in 1993 across the river from where I'm at now in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, from 93 to 95. And that's when I met, you probably remember, Verquan Kimbrough, who was a great amateur. And I started working with him, and I worked with Scotty McCracken. Verquan ends up becoming a 9-time national champion with me. But happening from 93 to 95, I was in Aliquippa for 2 years. And then in 95, the gym that I'm in now that I had started at closed. And I went over and reopened it because it was just a better space than what I had in Aliquippa. So I went back over there and reopened that gym. So I've been in that gym now and been running that gym since 1995. So it's been 25 years.
Was that originally Beaver County Boxing Club? Is that what that one was?
Right. And before it was Beaver County Boxing Club in 1991. And then, like I said, it went to 95, and then I reopened it and made it to Tom Yankello's world-class boxing gym. In 93, I was in 93, 95, I had the Aliquippa boxing gym, Then when I went back over there, reopened. It was just a better space, and so I went back over and reopened that. I've been there for 25 years, and I started working with Verquan. I had Scotty McCracken, and then I had met Paul Spadafora through this whole process. He was trained by another guy when he first started boxing back in 92, and I started in 93 when I got Scott McCracken was one of my fighters, ended up becoming a state Golden Glove champion, won Pittsburgh 4 years, went to the Nationals. Was a really good fighter, turned professional, ended up being a pretty decent pro, but never was able to win a world title. But he had started to spar on a regular basis with Paul. And just started to build that rapport with him. And then actually what happened on top of that is I got the itch to try to box again after all these surgeries. And I started to back then I was a 147 pounder and he was a lightweight. And I started sparring with him as well. I started sparring with Paul. I was training and trying to box again. I was going to try to give it one more chance. I was at that time, probably when we started sparring, I was in like 94, 95. So probably started sparring with Paul, maybe 94, 95. I had been, that's probably, I would have to be about 24 years old at that point, trying to give it one last stab. And then in early 97, I had been sparring a lot of them. I actually did come back. I actually had 3 more amateur fights. I won all 3 of them. And then in 97, early 97, the guy that was training Paul, PK Pecora from Pittsburgh, who had Paul from the time he started, he had a stroke. And at the time that he had a stroke, he didn't pass away at that time. He had a stroke early in I think January or February of 1997, and me and him had a pretty good rapport, and I think he had a lot of respect for me, and he liked what I was doing with the young fighters in the area, and Paul really enjoyed sparring with me, really enjoyed working with me, and he basically told Paul to go ahead and work with me during the time that he was hospitalized and he was off for a while. He wasn't able to come to the gym. So I started working with Paul early in 1997, and then PK had come back for a short period of time, and then in July he ended up having another stroke and ended up passing away. Oh wow! And then that's when I took the lead role with Paul in the summer, in July of 1997 is when I took the lead role with him and trained him, and he ended up winning the world title a little over two years later.
Right.
In August of 1999, he beat Israel Pito Cardona for the world title, lightweight title. Yeah. And then from there, I ended up working with just a lot of amateurs and bringing them up. I had Verquan Kimbrough, met a lot of people through the amateur system. I ended up meeting Calvin Brock, who was a 2000 Olympian. And then when he turned professional, 10 fights in, he just basically called me out of the blue and asked me, if I was interested. He had a lot of respect for what I had done with Paul and how good defensively Paul was, and just felt I could add to his game. And he reached out to me, and then I started working with him in 2002. It's kind of funny because the way it happened is that he reached out to me, but my brother played a big part in it because he actually ended up working in Charlotte together in the same building. He worked for Bank of America, and my brother was working with he was a financial advisor, and they actually worked in the same building. They met each other, and they just started talking. But he had met me. I had met Calvin with Verquan in the amateur tournaments and at the Olympic trials. So I had already known Calvin, and then we met my brother there, kept talking, and then, Calvin just felt like he needed to bring on a professional trainer because his dad had been his trainer his whole life, And then that's what happened. I started working with him, and I worked with him from, I think he was 10-0 or 9-0 when I started working with him, and then he ends up going 29-0 and fighting Vladimir Klitschko for the heavyweight championship in Madison Square Garden. But it doesn't get any bigger than that, the heavyweight championship. So, work with Monty Meza-Clay, who was #1 contender. Work with Teddy Reed, who ended up fighting for the welterweight title. Yep. So, that's my story in brief.
It's a good list there. Good list of world champions.
Yeah.
So what do you, some trainers become trainers and they're taught by other trainers in the gym, other coaches. They go in, they pick up what they can. You actually had some boxing experience. How do you think that benefits you as a coach, as a trainer? What do you learn from those experiences that you're able to bring into the ring and maybe give you a little bit of advantage for your fighters that they can take advantage of?
Well, I think, obviously being in there gives you the insight of what it actually feels like to be in there, knowing the intensity of the event and knowing the anxiety that fighters can go through, doubts, and just the mental part of it too, getting prepared for a fight, how to prepare for a fight, how you're trying to prepare your body. You really, the rest that's important. I mean, you learn that as a trainer as you go on as well, but, you learn as being a fighter from your mistakes as well as the things that you did well.
Right.
That competitive thing, that competitive edge of being in the ring, I think it definitely helps you be a better trainer because, and just being able to have that experience, knowing what it is to take a punch and to know that it ain't no joke. And it's a brutal sport. And, sometimes you're asking a fighter to do something. And it's like, if you were never in there, you don't have the sense that, hey, you could talk it all day out here, but being in there is a whole different ball game, And, just being a fighter as well, like learning how to, like for me, I feel like I learned a lot from boxing, myself, going to amateur tournaments. A lot of people talk about pros being a pro fighter, but like some of the greatest trainers that ever lived never fought a pro fight.
Right.
Some of them never fought a custom model, Angelo Dundee. But I think, being a trainer, having at least an amateur background definitely can help you. It can help you. I'm not saying that, it's absolutely necessary because it's been proven in history that it isn't, but I believe that it does help you because, for me, I learned boxing in the amateurs, even I think sometimes better than the pros, because you have to adjust on the fly in an amateur tournament and fight different styles.
You don't know what you got in front of you.
And you don't have no film footage to study. So your mind has to work quicker to fight. That's why I believe like as a professional fighter, you have to have that amateur background for so many reasons. First of all, that's where the promoters that's their farm system. You have to do something as an amateur to get signed to the right people, to get you in the right place, to do the right things with you. But at the same time, as a fighter, you really learn how to process quicker in the amateurs, even that you do if you never had an amateur background and you just turn professional, because that's, I mean, there's no bar for entry. That's what I think is bad about professional boxing. Anybody can turn professional. Yeah. So it's these guys that it's like you haven't graduated college, but you're going to go to the pros. You haven't been an All-American college player, or even an all section, and then you're going to the pros. So, but as an amateur boxer, what I can tell you is that for me, boxing different styles and learning how to adjust as a fighter, that that you're not going to fight the same guy the same way every time, or even if you have a certain style, your style could be the same, but you have to make certain adjustments that you might have to, this style, you might have to become a little bit more aggressive, or this way you're going to box even with your style. And, but for me, I really tell you that I believe that I learned, and I still do, I learned more than anything from film study of the all-time great fighters.
There you go.
Of really predominantly from the past, before 1960. And it's just my opinion. I feel those guys were so good. And you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, everybody talks about," but people don't understand that how great they had to be, because there was 8 world champions in 8 different divisions, and everybody was boxing back then. It wasn't professional football. It wasn't professional baseball back then. It wasn't basketball. It was back in the 30s and 40s. It was horse racing and boxing, a little bit of baseball, but predominantly NBA basketball. Like, and now that's what America's about. It's predominantly NBA basketball, NFL football, and your baseball. But, back then it was boxing. So everybody was boxing. It's like having a big school. If you have such a large pool, to be the top dog of that large pool, you have to be really, really good. And if they weren't better athletes, that's all the more reason to watch them, because if they came through that pool of a large pool, they had to have great skills. Of course, that athletic ability was they were all on the same playing field. But my point is really to basically contradict a little bit, come back to what I was saying, is just because of that large pool of fighters, the guys that are sneaking through and becoming a one world champion in each division, they had to have a great skill set to do that. And that's where I learned so much, because my uncle and my grandfather were film buffs, and they had all the old films of these guys. I watched hours of Ezra Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott and Rocky Marciano and Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson. And I still do to this day. Like, that's like my go-to. That's like my go-to. If these guys were doing it, there's a reason for it, because they're not going to have 250 amateur fights through this large pool of all these guys boxing, and come through that large pool and become one world champion in their division without having a great skill set and a foundation. So when you watch those guys, I mean, if you see the guys that were great today, and one of the greatest fighters, Roy Jones, he ends up beating James Toney, but I loved James Toney, and his trainer was Bill Miller. And what did he make him watch? Ezra Charles all day long. He was Ezra Charles' sparring partner. So, a lot of the great fighters, even, of today, or even in I love the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, me too.
A lot of those guys were trained by guys that were, bringing stuff to them from guys like Ezra Charles and Joe Louis. And the thing that people don't realize is that, I'm a historian. So like Joe Louis said, like the apple don't fall far from the tree, and the greatness is so it's like a close thing. In other words, what I'm getting ready to say is that people don't realize that Sugar Ray Robinson and Joe Louis grew up on a block apart from each other in Detroit, Michigan. And as Joe Louis was older than Sugar Ray, maybe 7-8 years older, when Sugar Ray started, he started training with Jackie Blackburn and Harry Wiley Sr., Harry Wiley Jr. or Sr. And he was trained by basically the first guy, the main guys. There's Jackie Blackburn. If you watch Sugar Ray Robinson and you watch Joe Louis, you see those guys boxing. If you just go, like, you got to learn how to stand before you learn how to walk. Yeah. You got to learn how, you know what I mean? Before you move so the first thing is the stance, then the footwork, then you put the hands. A lot of people they go right in the gym and they got people working with their hands. They don't work their stance and the basic stance and the basic footwork. So feet are always first, but the first thing before your feet even become moved is your stance. Right. And if you look at Ray Robinson and Sugar Ray Robinson and Joe Louis in their boxing stance in a fight or in a picture, just so similar. Yeah, I mean, it's just very similar, you know. Hands in the pocket in the air, you know, slight bend, you know, head's back more on the side of the right hip. You know, this hand's everything's in, like I said, this hand's almost at the heart. It's in the center. You know, it's not on the side of their faces. This is here. Hands aren't high on the head. But I mean, their stances are so very similar. The feet are just a little bit outside of shoulder width. And all the all-time greats, like a lot of the all-time greats had that stance. I mean, Benny Leonard, Ezra Charles,
Henry Armstrong. Well, I mean,
Santa Crops a little bit more, but I mean, you know, there's a foundation there that a lot of people are not, you know, they just dismiss it. Like they just dismiss it. Like people today are just so fixated that there's an athletes are bigger, better, and they do things they improvise and they evolve. Everything evolves. I hear this word about how things have evolved, but to me, there's basic fundamentals that do not evolve. You know, it's like shooting a basketball. Yes, there's guys that shoot crazy shots, but you know, shooting a basketball player. So, you know, you're shooting over the right eye. You know, the right foot is a little bit in front if you're right-handed, and you got your elbow in and you're shooting. So there's fundamental basics there that need to be, you know, put into a boxer when you start them to really develop, you know, for them to amplify their skill set to the top level.
Well, and even some of those basic fundamentals have gotten forgotten. You know, there are guys like, you know, as great and as influential as a Muhammad Ali is or Floyd Mayweather, other fighters look at them and try to pattern themselves after that. Well, those guys are really anomalies, you know, and they aren't paying strict attention to the fundamentals, and some guys just can't get away with that.
Right, for sure. And, you know, that's what I always say, you know, like a lot of people have copied Muhammad Ali because he was one of the greatest ever. I mean, he was one of those exceptions, though. So, you know, I always tell people, you know, like, Muhammad Ali ruined a lot of fighters. I mean, by trying to mimic what he did. I mean, I make a joke, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but he ruined more fighters than cocaine and alcohol. I mean, because, you know, in watching him and trying to mimic him, I mean, he is the ultimate exception, just the ultimate talent. Yeah. I mean, you're looking at a man who's 6'3", 6'3.5", with the reflexes of a cat, had an arm reach, and did things that were just. I mean, you know, I say Roy Jones, you know, arguably is the greatest athlete that ever boxed. And I'm an historian, so I don't want to offend anybody, but Muhammad Ali's right there. Those are the two greatest athletes. And Ali was a bigger version of Roy. He was, you know, he's 6'3.5", reflexes of a cat. You know, so those guys, you know, like even with Roy, you know, Roy, I felt like, and when he was a middleweight, he was a super middleweight when he fought again. A larger pool of fighters that had good technique. If you go back and you watch footage of Roy when he was a middleweight and super middleweight, he was more in tune to fundamentals and was more in tune to a better foundation. And as he went up to light heavyweight, like I said, I always say, like the more competitive divisions are middleweight, super middleweight and down. As the weight classes get heavier, you have a smaller pool of fighters. You don't have as many fighters.
Well, and that's why, I mean, you're bringing that up. That's why Roy was able to do what he was able to do against John Ruiz, right? I mean, it's just, he outmoved him, he outworked him, he's more speed, just all around.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he not only did he have more athletic ability than the heavyweight John Ruiz, he did have that skill set that was coming up. But, you know, I always tell Roy, I mean, when I'm working with him now, I mean, that's one of the things I'm trying to bring back to him is that, let's get back to some of the things you was doing as a middleweight and super middleweight. Let's get back to some of them fundamentals. Let's get back to the things that you did as a middleweight that made you successful, and it wasn't just your talent. You know what I mean? You're not going to beat a James Toney and a Bernard Hopkins with just talent. Right. You had to be doing, using your jab more, getting back to your stance, being a little bit tighter, and just having coordinate them fundamentals of things where you're not, you're just not doing things as loosely. You're tightening things up a little bit more. You know what I mean? He's not going to be like people talk about hands up. I mean, hands up, your offense is no good. We could talk about that kind of stuff all day long. But hands being in a little tighter, he's not going to be putting his hands behind his back. He's not going to be dropping and leaning, and he's going to do little baits. Of course, he's going to do little kind of baiting things, absolutely. But just tightening things up, using your jab more. Really trying to work on defense that doesn't have to do with just your footwork. Mm-hmm. Because he was just so fast before, he just moved out of the way faster. Right. And then he was able to jump on you it didn't matter how far he jumped back, didn't matter. He was still able to jump that fast right back in. You know what I mean? Yeah. So now he's got to shorten little things up because he doesn't have that spring in his legs, or he doesn't have that reflex. So he's got to learn the inches of the game. He's got to learn that fundamental. And he had that more as a middleweight. So with me, when I'm working with him, I'm trying to refresh his memory on what he did back then. Even as an Olympian, you didn't see him. He was a lot more technical as an Olympian. He had a lot more. His fundamentals were more in places. Even his stance was different. Stance was totally different than as you've seen as the years went on in the light heavyweight division, and even then when he fought as a heavyweight, and even later on in his career when he wasn't as successful. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that I'm trying to refresh and revitalize in him, because they're not things that he hasn't done. So it's not necessarily me teaching him something new. It's really getting the rust off of what he's done in the past and really trying to break some of the things that he got away with just because of his talent, and bring him back to the things that he had to do against Bernard Hopkins the first time, James Toney the first time. Some of the guys that he beat early on as a middleweight coming up to get the world title fight. And then as defending the world title against Malinga and, guys that he when he fought Vinny Paz, really trying to, what he had to do against these lighter guys that had better skill sets, things that he had to do that he wasn't just able to, like I said, once he got to the light heavyweight division, I mean, it just felt like he was just so dominant that he got away from things that he did as a middleweight and super middleweight. So that's what we're working on. I mean, we're working on bringing some of, really trying to tighten things up, bringing things back to what he did when he was a middleweight and super middleweight, where I feel like, to me, the best Roy Jones, a lot of people talk about the pinnacle of his career is when he beat John Reese at heavyweight. But see, that to me, that's not the best Roy Jones. The best Roy Jones is who beat James Toney. Yeah. 100%. Who he beat as a middleweight, even coming up, Percy Harris, Glenn Wolfe, when he won the title against Bernard, and then he won and he defended it a couple times. And then when he won the super middleweight division, when he defended that about 4 or 5 times. Once he became a light heavyweight, I feel like he got away from a lot of things that he did as a middleweight and super middleweight. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do, trying to take the rust off of that, revitalize that, bring that back, put that back into place for him.
Well, I notice how closely he listens to you, but don't you think that's just fighters that have been in the game for a while? For lack of a better word, they become lazy, not lazy in terms of their work ethic, but just the fundamentals. They get to a point to where they're maybe training themselves kind of, and their trainer backs off because they're the guy in charge. And pretty soon those things start slipping, and then they find themselves
There's no doubt
beat or just not the same fighter.
Great point, Doug. Great point. A lot of guys, they just they run the show. Yeah. Yeah. And no one tells them any different because of how great they've been. Right. And even for myself, it's hard. It's hard for me. I mean, here I am, I'm dealing with a guy that's done more in the sport than, how many, and one of the greatest fighters that ever lived. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's in the argument. I mean, he started his career at super middleweight. He went all the way to heavyweight to win the heavyweight championship. No one has ever done that, you know? So for me to come in and to really give him, like I said, what I have done to be able to, you know, get that confidence from him and is to basically, I mean, I'm a film buff, so is to show him things, because you could go and you could tell somebody something and, you know, it's from me to you. And then they could look at me like, okay, I've done more in the sport than you could ever, you know, you ever even thought about doing, you know, you ever could dream about. Where does the respect factor come in? Well, you know, it comes from, I take footage of even himself and I show him, look what you did here. Now look what you did here. Look how you were successful because you did it this way. Look how you could, you know, when you were unsuccessful, you're doing this. And the proof is in the pudding, you know what I mean? So, and I've been able to break down film. I think I'm very, very, really talented at that. Right. So that is where when I go there with him, that earns his respect, because he knows that I am not just saying something because, you know, it's my way of teaching or my style or the way I this is my belief, you know what I mean? Like, I am showing him footage of himself, showing what, you know, what has worked very well for him, what hasn't worked so well for him. Right. And then watching film of, you know, as right now, Mike Tyson, you know, this is what Mike does well, and this is what you do well that could nullify it. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this is what he doesn't do so well, and this is what you've done in the past that can capitalize on that. So exactly. It's about comparing both of them. It's not just saying, because a lot of times you watch the other guy fight, but your guy doesn't have the ability or know what he's supposed to do to capitalize on it. So right. I'm showing Roy things that he does that'll give Mike trouble, and I'm also showing him things that, you know, that'll nullify his strengths as well. You know, not just capitalize on his weakness, but nullify his strengths. And, right. and all those things have that Roy has done and does have in his video archive. So there's spots and fights that I watched that, you know, like, this is what you got to do to see what you did here in this fight against this style, against this kind of guy, you know. So, you know, that's where, you know, I feel like I've been able to really open his eyes to what, when I come into the gym, I actually sometimes, if you ever notice some of the things I do post, I have my phone in my hand sometimes, and I've made clips of certain fights and certain things that I need him to work on and why he needs to work on it, because this is what works against this style, or, you know, works against Mike, or this, and this is what you're doing here. So even in the middle of shadow boxing around or hitting the pads, I can pull out the phone, or even after our training sessions, or even a lot of times, even like today, before he sparred, I showed him some footage of himself and things that he did well, that he needs to do well in this fight. Let's try to implement. Look, this is you doing it. I'm not making it up. Yep. This is not something that's just my opinion or my style of coaching that I want you to do it this way. No, this was you doing this. So I know you can do it. You know what I mean? So let's try to work on you doing this again. You know what I mean? So that's been my style with him. And a lot of my fighters, just studying the all-time greats, trying to implement their fundamentals, trying to really watch what great fighters do, and then being able to recognize, like I said about Muhammad Ali, every great fighter has flaws, some more than others, and some have been exceptions where they've had a ton of flaws, but then never been successful. But, you know, which is difficult if you don't know, or you don't have the foundation in your mind of really what you're looking for. But what I was getting ready to say is that I watch film with my guys. I try to tell them, this is what we want to take from this guy. And everybody's a different style. So, like, I'm not going to train, like I had Monty Meza-Clay, who was 5'2". I'm not going to train him like I train who I have now, Keonta Irving, 2018 National Gold Glove champion. He's a 6'3" middleweight. He's 7-0 right now, 7 knockouts. He's not going to fight the same way a 5'2" guy is. So with the 5'2" guy, I'm probably watching more Henry Armstrong and Joe Frazier and guys that had to cut the distance and get on the inside of a bigger guy, you know. And then with Keonta, I'm watching more Klitschko, Thomas Hearns, Lennox Lewis, Sugar Ray Robinson, and being able to steal from, you know, and know what to take from those guys and what to leave alone. Like identifying that's a flaw. I don't want to take that from that guy. I want to take this from the guy. I want to take what he does well. You know, so that's what I feel like a lot of times, because a lot of times my fighters come to the gym and like, well, Canelo does it like that, or Mayweather does it like that. Well, okay, you just so happen to pick the one thing or two things that Canelo and Mayweather are doing, either as bait or they're not. You're misinterpreting it, or you're taking one of their flaws, and that's a big mistake that a lot of people do. They interpret things the wrong way. And a lot of times a guy will go like this because he's baiting. He's not purposely leaning on his front leg, and they take it as, you know, that's for an example. But, you know, a lot of guys are using that as bait. So you're interpreting it as that's the way he's fighting. That is not his foundation, the way he's fighting. That's why Floyd, he would bait you here right into the shoulder roll, make you run right into something, or pull and counter on you, you know what I mean? Because that was a bait. But a lot of guys can misinterpret moves from all the all-time greats. They misinterpret them, or they actually have taken their flaws and tried to think that they're their pluses. You know what I mean? But so that's something that can be tricky at times, being able to identify. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. So I have to really study it too and say, that's something right there that, you know, that's not something that's going to work as a fundamental. That's something that's going to work maybe because that guy's more athletic, or he's baiting the guy to try to set something up. It's not something that I'm going to instill in an up and coming fighter as a fundamental. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. So those are things that you know. But film study for me is where I've learned the game. Just hours and hours, and I constantly hours and hours still continue to watch film. Like I said, predominantly most of the guys from before 1960. Yeah. You know, I love Joe Louis. And a lot of people talk about, he fought, you know, he fought guys that he had the Bum of the Month Club, and he fought guys that, these guys today. Well, that's not the point. The point is even if these guys today were bigger and better athletes, and even if they would have beaten him, that has nothing to do with it. Joe Louis, pound for pound, was a better technician. He was 200 pounds at 195 or 200 pounds, and he was 6 foot tall. So we're not talking about would he beat these guys as bigger guys. Like he could never beat those guys today, the heavyweights. That's not the point. The point is you're not watching him because he was going to be able to beat anybody in history. You're watching the technical side. You know, when you watch Sugar Ray Robinson, the same thing. And he still arguably, I don't care what anybody says, he still arguably could have beaten anybody today. You know, but even if you feel like these guys today are better athletes, and you feel like that they could have beaten him, you know, that's saying a lot that they could have beaten him, because, like I said, again, he's coming through such a large pool of all these guys fighting. Yeah. But even if with that being said, if you want to say that these guys today could have beat him because they're bigger, better athletes, you know what? It doesn't mean that they were better technicians. So me as a coach, and you're bringing a fighter on, that's what you're trying to master, the technical side. We're all born with a pool of talent. Mm-hmm. So we're only going to amplify that to its potential. But what we can also always increase is our skill level. You know, you can have a guy that can throw a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, and, you know, I'm never going to be able to do that. But if I master my curveball and I master my knuckleball, my slider, I can still pitch in the major leagues without throwing a 100-mile-per-hour fastball. Right. You know what I mean? So, you know, the talent is you know, talent has a ceiling. Whatever your talent is, but it has a ceiling. You're not going to gain. You're only going to increase the talent potential that you have. But skills are something that is a craft that can be honed and continue to get better and better and better and better and better. So for me, I'm not worried about who would have won in history. I'm worried about watching these guys on what they did to make them successful, because they come through a large pool of fighters. They had to be great. There wasn't, I mean, I just seen the other day, Now the WBC came out with a 224-pound championship.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many alphabet titles and so many titles in every division that how could you possibly, when you're a world champion, even be recognized? Because you got so many guys we don't even know who the champions are. Even myself, as much as I don't follow that as much as I watch old films, but like, it's amazing when you got a guy who says he's a unified champion, but there's still 3 more world champions in his division.
It's hard to follow it.
Lopez won the title against Lomo, and then it's just crazy because it's like, and that's my point. For you to come through a large pool of fighters like those guys did back then when everybody was boxing and become that one world champion, you had to be doing something right. So guys that dismiss those guys in the olden days of watching those guys fight, it's a real loss for people that dismiss those guys, because those guys were just great technicians. They had great foundations. And a lot of times, I hear people talk about, as trainers, they talk about that's an old school move or this and this. But at the same time, again, someday everything that's taught today is going to be old. So just because a lot of people try to validate what they teach as it was old, this is old school. Well, someday everything that's being taught now is going to be old. It doesn't mean it was good. There's good and bad today. It was good and bad back then. So that's one thing I always do hear some people say, and I see things and they say, oh, I learned this from an old school trainer, or this is old school stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it ain't the same old school stuff I saw, or same old school stuff I was taught. So again, just because you use the word old to validate something doesn't mean it was good, because today's stuff will someday be old, but it doesn't mean that it's all good as well. So I've learned, like I said, from film of all-time greats, and I have broken it down slow motion. I love YouTube now. They got
everything's on there.
Dot on the right-hand side. You can slow things down, you know? A lot of people don't know about that. I didn't know about that till I was tipped off by a guy, Mustafa's Boxing, who I love. He's on Instagram, and he was watching film, and he was talking. A kid had tipped him off to it, and I saw his post. And I said, "Oh, I'll be a son of a gun. I never realized that I could do that on my phone. Go to the right and dot and go to some." And now, that has just taken it to another level for me to watch those old films that I watched my whole life, and not really take it and slow it down and see some of the things these guys are doing. Man, I tell you, there's some great fights for people to watch on YouTube. One of the fights that I love to watch, even this is not even back before 1960, but if you watch Mike McCallum fight James Toney and put that fight in slow motion when they were middleweights, and watch some of the craftful things those guys were doing,
the nuances,
was just awesome. You watch Ezra Charles fights and Sugar Ray Robinson, and Joe Louis, and go really watch those fights and study even Benny Leonard. And I tell you, I even pull out things that are blurry, but you watch Joe Gans, and Charlie Burley, it's a shame you don't have the footage on him. He was a Pittsburgh guy, so that's like, you really have that that hometown camaraderie when you watch him. You get that feeling of the hometown kind of thing, and Billy Conn and Harry Greb. Doug, I don't know how much you study these guys, but Harry Greb, if you go look at his box record.
I'm with you. I love boxing history. I'm all about it. I still have VCR tapes. I don't even have a VCR player, but I just hate to throw them out. But like you said, everything's on YouTube. So,
Yeah. But if you go to Harry Greb's box rec, this guy will make your head pop. He will make your eyes pop out of your head. Like, he was fighting. Back then it was in the the teens, 1918, 1917, 1919, 1920. So he wasn't flying, and he was going from city to city, back to back, fighting 15 rounds. He wasn't the biggest puncher, and he was fighting 15-round fights. And then the next night in another city, which means that he got done fighting, basically maybe took his hand wraps off, got on a train. I mean, you see things he's fighting in Chicago, and the next night he's fighting another 15-rounder in New York, and that has to be trained. It's not a plane. So that's just amazing to me, like how people can dismiss that. That is just unreal how durable. I mean, he fought, I think he was 46 or 47-0 in a 2-year span.
Mm-hmm.
He was fighting on an average 2 times a month. Like sometimes he was fighting on a Friday and fighting again on a Saturday, or fighting on a Thursday and fighting again on a Saturday. I mean, every other night he was fighting at the time. I mean, Willie Pep, same thing with Willie Pep.
Yeah.
I mean, Willie Pep had how many fights? It was just, he was 135-1 at one time.
Yeah. These guys, part of their training was fighting.
You
know,
they learned a lot of things on the fly.
Fighting once a month or more.
There wasn't all. I mean, hey, I'm a big guy. I work the mitts, and Roy likes it because his hands are little, and we work the mitts and stuff. But you didn't have guys doing all this fancy mitt work, and when we work the mitts, we're working on punching power, we're working on technique, and we put some routine in things for muscle memory and for fun and for breaking the monotony and getting the focus and the concentration. But we're trying to really work on real punches that we're going to use in the fight, and we're trying to throw realistic power on those shots too. Not shortchanging our punches where we're just throwing short choppy shots that just look pretty. We're trying to get full extension, just the way we're going to, the way he's going to follow through and land a shot in the fight, and the way he's got to be able to do that muscle memory. He's got to be able to do that on the pads. But those guys, they learned in the ring, man. They learned in the ring of a large pool. So they did the legwork for us, is what I mean about watching these all-time greats. What works and what doesn't work, because they didn't do it. Like you said, a lot of their training was fighting. And they fought so many fights. So to come through that large pool of fights and to learn on the fly like that, and if they were doing things wrong, someone would have beat them. Someone would have exposed those flaws, because, not that they didn't have flaws, but someone would have exposed that because there were so many fighters. Right. Someone's going to expose that. So then to come through that large pool of fighters, that they had to have a great skill set, and they had to figure a lot of things out on the fly. And if they didn't figure it out, they lost. Yeah. So when you got a guy like Willie Pep and did the things he did, and Henry Armstrong, I mean, if you have a smaller guy like Henry, that's an aggressive guy. I mean, you could pick a lot of things up from Henry Armstrong. I think there's a lot of guys that I like to watch, even as years go on, that were really good. The guys that were shorter guys that really had to do things. If we talk about shorter guys, like I love Dwight Braxton, Dwight Muhammad Qawi, the way he used his jab as a smaller guy. Yeah. And I think David too actually stole a little bit of that from Dwight Muhammad Qawi, and he was a guy that I loved, and we won't even maybe can't consider him old school at this point. Right. But he's becoming old school as the years go on. Dwight Muhammad Qawi was a very. I mean, you got a guy who's 5'4", 5'5", 5'6", was beating light heavyweights and cruiserweights, and Gabe Evander Holyfield was one of the most. I mean, one of the greatest heavyweights and technicians. I mean, Vander's so underrated. Vander's so.
I totally agree. I think only time he'll go down as one of the greatest heavyweights ever.
For sure.
I want to come back to Roy Jones. We've talked a little bit about him, but I want to back up a little bit, because I do want to talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh kid, Paul Spadafora. I mean, you and I have talked before. I mean, what a story, what could have been. I mean, not that he didn't achieve some things in the 50 fights that he did fight, but what that kid could have materialized into being if his personal life hadn't gotten in the way of his professional life.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that Paul is one of the most, and for due reasons, because he never, what I'm about to say, he never accomplished the things he should have accomplished. But man, what an underappreciated lightweight champion. Right. Technically, I mean, I'm in the gym years later. I mean, I've been with some of the greats. I mean, I watched him spar Floyd. I've been in the gym with, just so many great fighters, Roy Jones. And I mean, I could just tell you that Paul was he was truly great. It's just a real shame that people will never realize how great he was. We could go back, like I said, we could go back to the Floyd Mayweather sparring session.
Okay, well, I do want to talk about that because that's probably infamous.
Yeah.
But from his very start, from his debut, he and Floyd were really on a collision course because they I think they both turned pro in the same year, didn't they?
No, Paul was a little bit earlier because Floyd was a '96 Olympian. And I believe he turned pro later that year in '96, but Paul had actually turned pro a year beforehand.
Okay.
In '95.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was somewhere within a year. Okay.
Yep.
But they are always talking about those two fighting from the very beginning. There is that famous footage, that infamous footage on YouTube. I would assume it's still there that most people have seen, where it appears that Paul is kind of giving money more than he can handle. So I want to hear the real story behind that because there's been a lot of different versions, but I want to hear it straight from you.
Well, just to let you know, that's my camcorder that taped that session.
I didn't know that for sure.
Yeah, that's my camcorder that taped that session. And
well, they must have been pretty confident if they let you tape it. They must have thought they were going to fare pretty well.
Yeah, and the way that session went down, and that's why I say, this is why, a sparring is sparring. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Floyd or make this bigger than it was. It was a sparring session. But the way it went down was that we were training at that time at Nevada Partners. And it was a gym where a lot of the big names in Vegas train. You remember that gym, right?
I do. I've spent quite a bit of time there. Sugar Ray Leonard's Nevada Partners. Richard Steele ran that place for many years.
Ran the gym. Exactly. So, we had been training there, and at that time, that's when Floyd didn't have his gym, and he had trained at that gym as well. And we would usually train early afternoon around 1:00. He would train after us, and I'd always wanted to go learn as much as I could learn. I'm still, like I said, the same way today. Yep. So I would always watch him work out. Like Paul would be done, he'd go shower up, and he might be doing some stomach work or what have you. And I would always go. We would train on one side of it. We always end up training in like ring 1, and he was in ring 3. He was always at all the way total opposite of the gym. So I would always just go over on the opposite side of the gym and just sit there. There was some seating there, and I would just sit and watch him train for, at least for like a half hour or so. Sometimes I'd even drive separate to watch, because everybody was training that gym. It wasn't like, I was walking into his gym watching him, and people were just in that gym. Everybody shared that gym, So I would watch him train. Sometimes I would drive separate so I could just watch him train. So the one day that's what happened. I went to watch him train. I stayed that day. Paul went back, and he started to kind of yip yap at me out of the corner of his eye, basically. And he says, he was hitting the pads at that time with his dad. Yep. And he says to me, "I'm the best pound for pound fighter in the world." He says, I hear your guys in here giving people the business, giving people the work, but he don't want any of this. I'm the best fighter pound for pound in the world. He ain't running through me, and he ain't doing this. And I didn't say anything really. I just let him keep. He kept talking, and he's hitting the pads, and then he says I hear he's getting the better of this guy and that guy. Without naming names, he ain't doing that to me. I'm the best fighter pound for pound in the world. You want to get this work with me, we can get this work. So he said to me something like, it's almost a faded memory now. It's amazing how time flies, but he said something to me about like, well, we can do this Thursday at 2:00 or something like that. So I said, okay. I said, we could do that. I told him we could do it. And I was working with Paul. I had Jesse Reed working with me as well at that time. We were working together. So I went back to the ranch. We were staying at the Pine Ranch Resort, and I told him what had happened. And I says, Floyd says he wants to spar with us on Thursday at 2:00. And so I asked Paul, I said, you want to do that? And he says, yeah, of course I'll do it. I mean, Paul would just spar with who never even thought twice about who he's sparring, right. It didn't matter. Put a body in front of Paul, he's going to – and that's the way he was fighting too. That's why it's a shame that he never got to fight a lot of these great fighters, because he would have fight anybody. Yeah. He was old school. There was no he wanted to fight them all, he wanted to fight them all. So, yeah, I told them guys, and they said, okay, we're going to do it, and I think before I left the gym that day, the funny part I always think about in my head is that when I left, right before I left the gym, Jerome Coffey was still there, and he says to me, did I hear you talking to Floyd saying he was going to spar with Paul? And I said, yeah, they're going to probably spar. They're going to spar Thursday at 2:00. And, in fact, it was Wednesday we were training. So it was like, we could do this tomorrow at 2:00. Uh-huh. 2:00, we do this tomorrow. And Jerome Coffey says, so they're going to spar tomorrow at 2:00? I'm like, yeah, pretty sure. I said, I don't think we're going to turn it down. I said, I'm going to go back and talk to Paul. And he's like, oh, man. He says, I'm telling everybody. He says, the best two fighters in all of boxing are boxing tomorrow. He was convinced that those two were the best two guys. He says, I co-watch. He says, I come in here. I've been coming in here for years. I watch Floyd box. He says, and I watch this kid box. He says, your kid can box, man. He's like, I'm telling you, I watch all kinds of guys. These are the best two guys in boxing. He says, that's going to be a good sparring session. He says, I'm telling everybody. So we came in that day, and I tell you what, he apparently made the buzz go, because that place was pretty packed that day. It's hard to see on the video, but like people were sitting on the ring, like sitting on all the three rings, People were like kind of standing on the other rings. We were on the far ring, but the other two rings, there was a lot of people standing on those rings and sitting around the gym. And
so I got to interrupt you. So had you seen stuff in Floyd as you had been watching, and you weren't preparing for that, but you obviously were taking notes on what Floyd was doing and not doing. Did you talk to Paul about that going into that sparring session?
Somewhat. Yeah, a little bit at that time. Yeah, I definitely told him some things that I felt like would work, And that's one thing that people don't realize how great, like Paul, like I said, really, really was great, man. Like people don't realize, he could, when he fought a lot of his title defenses as a lightweight, he wasn't 100%. And I hate to use that excuse, but a lot of things that he did wrong on the outside. So that's why you can't use an excuse, because it made him suffer as far as his weight coming down the right way. He was always weakened by making that weight, because he had blown up in weight in between fights, doing things that he shouldn't have been doing.
Well, and for I don't want to dwell on it, but for those fans who don't know, Paul had a drinking problem, right?
Yeah, very.
And that ultimately ended his career.
It did, and it amplified the other things other than the alcohol. Alcohol was the foundation of the problem, and then the other things went with it as well. But he could fight on the inside, is where I was going tremendously, and he never did that as a lightweight as much. He did at times, but he was. He just used for the most part, he was one of the taller lightweights. He's one of the taller lightweights. So he was able to utilize what he had and deal with the lightweights and outbox them from a distance and maintain the pace of keeping the fight in the middle of the ring and do things like that, where he really didn't have to press a guy. Right. But I knew he could press, and I knew he could fight on the inside. And if you watch that sparring session, he started to get to the inside of Floyd. And I knew he could be. He was a better right in the trench fighter than Floyd.
Like fighting right in the pocket.
Floyd's not. I'm not saying Floyd can't fight on the inside.
Right.
But Floyd's a better from a distance. He knows how to use his. He knows range. Right. He knows how to keep the range. He knows how to keep the distance. He knows how to he knows how to utilize and set the pace. And he's so intelligent. It's hard to get him on the inside. Guys that were successful were the guys that fought him on the inside. Jose Luis Castillo, guys that pressured him, like Oscar De La Hoya, Ricky Hatton early on, and gave him trouble.
Yep.
Maidana gave him a rough fight the first time. Even the second time hurt him a couple times.
Yep.
I mean, so the guys that pressed Floyd are the guys that gave him trouble, guys that were able to get to the inside. Miguel Cotto gave him a rough fight in spots in that fight. I mean, did he win? Did he end up passing those tests? Yes. Castillo was very, very controversial.
Yeah.
De La Hoya was as well.
Yep.
And those guys pressed him. Maidana's fight, I felt he won both those fights, but the first one was relatively close. So I knew Paul had his own way of being even slicker than those guys, putting pressure, and he was able to corner Floyd in that session. He was able to put some pressure on him, and he was able to box him from that southpaw angle, stepping around him a certain way where, as that southpaw, getting that southpaw angle, and Paul was a master of being able to really manipulate an orthodox fighter with that movement, and so those are the things that, of course, him being a southpaw and using that and fighting a little and going and pressing Floyd, using some of the inside skills that he had. We definitely, that was the thing that we talked about before they had that sparring session. And the thing I always talk about that sparring session is like two things that they, like I said, people say it appeared to Paul, gave him everything that he wanted and then some. And three things I say about it. I've heard a lot of excuses about why it happened.
Right.
But then I hear that he didn't get the better of him from some people. Paul didn't get the better of him. So why are we making excuses? What do we make excuses for if he didn't get the better of him? That's number one. Number two, it's a sparring session. I understand that. But he asked for the sparring session. And then I hear that he wasn't in fight shape.
Right.
And I know he wasn't in fight shape. Paul was 3 weeks away from a fight. But we also know one thing about Floyd Mayweather. He's always in shape.
Right. Yeah.
He's always in shape.
Well, if he wasn't, he learned from that.
Right. But he was in the gym at the time that we were training. Right. They always say that he just got back in the gym. And maybe so. We had arrived there and only trained there for that training camp 6-7 weeks. When we got there, he was training, so maybe he had just started training there. Maybe he was only there for a week or two, because we had got there and I watched him train a week or two before maybe 2-3 weeks before we did the sparring session, because we were there for like 6 weeks. So, I mean, he was there training when we were there. So maybe he had just got there and started training when we got there. But he was training. This wasn't something that we pulled him out of the house and had him do. And the session would have never taken place without him pushing the session. Right, so if you ask for something and it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go, you can't come up with you weren't in shape or you weren't fights or, whatever excuse, what I mean? So, and the reason that did affect his career was two things after that fight. So he definitely impacted him. He never let anybody tape his sparring again. If you watch him like 24/7, they would pull it, say, "Oh, he's sparring, all cameras off."
Yep.
He never let anybody tape his sparring.
Yeah.
And that's when his dad split. When him and his dad split, his dad was in. If you watch that session, his dad was in that spot, was coaching him in that sparring session. After that fight, you go look at the next fight, is when Roger took over.
Oh, interesting.
And his dad never came back until the end of his career. So it was definitely, that session it definitely ruffled the feathers and didn't go the way he expected it to go, and at times there towards at the end of Paul's career, we tried to make that fight and, legitimately, he could say, "Yeah, well, I have everything to lose, and there's no market value for me to fight Paul Spadafora to make the money that I'm worth now. Right. So I'm not going to fight Paul Spadafora." But I always thought that fight would have been a very interesting fight style-wise. Paul had the style to give anybody trouble. Yeah. I don't care who it was. He had. He had a little Pernell Whitaker in him, a little Joe Calzaghe. Yeah. He could throw a lot of punches. He could, he could fight on the inside. He could fight on the outside. He had that southpaw angle. I mean, I think Paul was he was a problem for anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to, and I feel like he could beat anybody, not just trouble. I feel like he had the ability to beat anybody on any given night. Whether he would have been able to beat Floyd, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, he'd have beat him. There's no doubt he'd have beat him. Floyd's a great fighter,
yeah, right.
One of the greatest of all time. Right. But I just surely think that, like you say, Paul, like, oh, well, he's not. Floyd's one of the greatest of all time. Paul wasn't one of the greatest of all time. He wasn't because of a lot of the things we're talking about. But I think Paul was, man, he was so good, and so he's just so underrated, underappreciated, and for due reasons, because like I said, he wasn't able to show what he was able to do against great fighters and for a long extended time for what happened and to his career because of his own, a lot of his own demons, but man, I tell you, just to be around him, how much I learned over the years about boxing, about positioning, about slowing the pace down, how to slow the pace, why it's not so vitally important to be the fastest guy all the time, and positioning can beat speed. He knew how to neutralize speed, probably better than anybody I've ever been around, amateur to pro. And he knew positioning. People don't realize how important it is. It's just like, it's just like wrestling. I mean, you get, my dad was a wrestling coach as well. He helped me with boxing, but he was a basketball coach and wrestling coach. And I trained a lot of boxers who were wrestlers, and I would have, even in my gym, I would have wrestlers that were lightweight wrestlers, and they could throw one of my big heavyweights down. I had that incident happen in my gym, and I was just like, wow. And it all had to do with leverage, positioning, was able to manipulate the big heavy guy and take him down because of the technique and the position, all that bigness and strength that mean a thing. And in boxing, it can do this. It can happen the same way. Yeah. I mean, you have a guy who's bigger, faster, stronger, but if you get a guy that really knows the position, he knows how to get to those positions smoothly, because smooth is fast, man, it can cause you a lot of problems. And Paul was that guy. He knew positioning, and he wasn't just a guy. Don't ever underestimate his athletic ability. Whether he was the athlete of Floyd Mayweather, probably not the physical athlete, maybe, but he was a very good athlete. He played basketball to the point where probably if he'd have just solely played basketball, even being 5'9", 5'10", he was probably maybe close to a Division I prospect, at least a Division II prospect. Mm-hmm. He was very, very quick and agile. Balance was tremendous. Just an overall physical good athlete as well. Right. And any less of the athletic ability that he didn't have against a Floyd or a guy that maybe was more talented, he could make up for it with positioning. That fight would have been a great fight. That fight would have by no means been a blowout. Yeah. By no means. I mean, everybody can have their opinion, say I'm crazy, whatever, but nah, it would have by no means. It would have been a really good fight. I'm not even saying, I'm not going to sit here and say we'd have won the fight, but it would have been an interesting fight. It would have been two serious technicians, and I think it would have been a great fight, man.
Well, again, really he's a great story for what could have been, sadly, but also again, if fighters, if you haven't watched watched Paul's fights. Again, YouTube's a great place to go on, watch the sparring session, watch some of his championship fights, and there's something to be learned from him.
Yeah, and I brought back some of his moves on just recently on my YouTube channel, my World Class Boxing channel. Yep. That I have on YouTube now, and I had Paul. We did some videos in my gym. We also did down there on the river with the city in the back. Yeah, real nice setting, and we went over a couple of his moves that he had done, and we went over some moves of some other southpaws as well. I covered a couple of his moves that he had done, And so I brought him back. He's going to be coming back again on my channel. We'll be doing some other videos of his slick moves, and people seem to love it. I mean, they all comment, give us more of Paul's moves, you know.
Yeah, I love it.
So
that's
it'll
great.
be something that we'll be continue to do in the future.
Good. We want to make sure and remind everybody of your world-class boxing channel on YouTube, and we'll come back to different ways to follow you. We'd be remiss if we didn't hit on the major topic here before we wrap up, and that's the upcoming fight between Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson. Let's talk about it. How did that come about?
Well, some of it's a mystery as much as it is to you. It's the same way to me as well. You know, I just know that, you know, Tyson brings so much of the general public. You know, he's just a huge icon publicly, not just boxing wise. I mean, more people know him than they know Roy or any other boxer. I mean, if you go down the street and you ask people, you know, the regular average person, you know, you can ask them all kinds of boxers. The one they're going to know is, you know, it used to be Muhammad Ali. Now it's Mike Tyson. Yeah. You know, he's the most recognizable boxer, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it all stems down to him. I think Roy was kind of contently retired. And then when Mike just said he was going to start to do this, that he wanted to try to do this again, and everybody was so interested in it. So then I said to myself, when I seen it, I says, oh man, it's destined to happen, because he's saying it and looks like he's getting in some kind of shape and people want to see it. Yeah. And I told my wife, I says, if he challenges Roy, I said, Roy's coming out of retirement. Roy doesn't know how to turn down a challenge.
Well, and how could you that too?
Turn something like that down.
Yeah.
He loves the limelight. I mean, he's a fighter of the heart. He loves the adrenaline of it. He loves the challenge of it. I mean, he's just the ultimate warrior. I mean, you want to talk about a guy that just loves to do it, man. And
well, and from some of the clips, he looks like he's a little bit revitalized. I feel like he's getting a little bit more speed back. Like you say, I think he's fine tuning some things, sharpening some skills up. Is this going to make him want to throw his hat back in the ring again, you think?
You know what? That's for him to tell you or to say, but I don't put anything past it. It all comes down. I don't think he'll fight again for just any reason. I think there's certain guys out there that he would like to fight again. And I'm not even talking about present day guys. I think there's old scores that he'd like to settle, you know, with certain guys. Sure. So I think that's something that would spark his interest again after this one. But when the Tyson fight came up, I told my wife, I said, if they challenge Roy, he's gonna take this opportunity. Yeah. He's gonna take the fight. And then all of a sudden, 2 days later, I see on Instagram he announces that he's gonna fight, and they put the poster up. Yeah. And I had worked with him almost 10 years ago now, and I had worked with him probably a 3 or 4 year period, from like 2011 to 2014, off and on, and I had traveled with him, and he was working for HBO at the time. He was training fighters at the time. And we really always worked good together. And the last 3 or 4 years of his career, we kind of stopped working together because he wasn't able to land the big fight. And it just wasn't business-wise, either one of us. It was just hard because I wanted him to come to my gym because he you know, and he had trained fighters in Vegas and California and even Montreal, and he was training in Florida, and he was still traveling with HBO, and I had a full gym and I had all these fighters, you know what I mean? So it was was just having a hard time for it to make sense for both of us, you know what I mean? So we kind of like, you know, just kept in touch, man. We're always in touch. Like I always would talk to him, you know, periodically, not on a regular basis, but periodically we always would talk to each other, text each other, a lot of texting, more than talking. But when the fight got announced, I just reached out to him, you know, because it was kind of ironic because I had started doing some videos on my YouTube channel of Mike Tyson. and I did probably a dozen of them.
Yep.
And then people were really liking what I was showing on my YouTube channel. And they had talked about, is there any kind of extended instructional that you could do on Mike Tyson? And I was going to just start to do that. And I was just brainstorming the things that he did well and how I would put that video together. And Roy announced that he was fighting Mike Tyson. And I'm just like, man, I really have been brainstorming Mike Tyson. I know Roy as well as anybody. I work with him. I says, and I'd say to myself, I said, I know how I can help him win this fight.
Yeah.
I said, man, I got to get with him. Somehow we got to make this work, this fight. I got to come to Florida, take some of my fighters, or he got to come here, or try to figure something out, you know? So I just reached out to him. And when I reached out to him, he responded right back. And he says, yeah, man, I think it makes a lot of sense. I would love to work with you again for this one. Let's do it. You know, he was just all on board about it. He said, I'll come to Pittsburgh. He said, then maybe you come down here. Then we'll decide where we're going to do the whole camp, or most of the time we're going to be doing a train where we're going to train.
Right.
So he was supposed to come to Pittsburgh. And when the fight got announced, the Triller set that's doing it went down to Florida, and they started to film him already, and he's getting ready to get on the plane. And they tell him, you're not going anywhere. You can't leave. We got our whole production set here. We would have to relocate for insurance purposes for the COVID. We cannot do that. You got to make him come down here. So he calls me. He's like, man, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to come out. I know I gave you a commitment to come up there. He says, but I'm under this contract. And they said that they can't reroute right now. They just come down here. They'd have to do this whole process to get back up to Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. So I ended up going to Florida for the first 2 weeks when the fight got announced. And we trained 2 weeks. And then after the first 2 weeks, the fight got pushed back to November 28th because originally it was supposed to be September 12th.
Yeah.
And then it gets pushed to November 28th. So after 2 weeks, I went home. And then he just kind of did his own thing for 3 or 4 weeks. And then he came up to Pittsburgh. At that time, they had brought some of the production up. At that time, they had more time to make that transition. And he trained in Pittsburgh for 2 weeks. And like I said, he's got a lot of things going on. And we kind of wanted to break the training up as well, because to train that long of a time is how you stagnate as well.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
And I didn't want him to stagnate. And like I said, a lot of things he did. So he had come here, he trained for 2 weeks. Then he went home for 2 weeks. He came and he trained for 2 weeks. And he went home for 2 weeks. And he came and he trained for 2 weeks. And then I take that back. He trained for 2 weeks in Florida. Then I went home for about 3 or 4 weeks. Then he came up for 2, went home for 2, came back for 2. And now he's been here again. He came for a week, and then he left for a week because he had some fights. And then he come here for this week, and then he'll be here for next week, and then we go to L.A.
Right.
So altogether, we're going to have about probably 8 to 9 weeks together over this since this fight got announced, like the last week of July.
Yeah.
We'll probably have a total. I'm trying to think 2, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, about 9 weeks we were able to put together for this fight all together over this period of time. But that's how it's been. We broke up the training. I did one trip, like I said, beginning of Florida. Then the rest of the training's been here in Pittsburgh, but he has left in 2 weeks at a time at a point. And then he had some fighters fighting in Mexico last week. He went to Mexico. I mean, he's still an active trainer.
He's still busy, yeah.
Very good one, a very, very, very good trainer as well. He definitely understands, the things fundamental things, and that every guy can't be the same. It can't be a Roy Jones. So,
sure.
Those are the things, like I said, like I know a lot of great fighters try to train the fighters just the way they fought, and that's it. Like
and that doesn't work.
That's the way they fought, and that's the way. But everybody that they train, that's how they're going to train that fighter. He could be. They could have been a boxer. I mean, this kid's 5'2", and he's got to be an aggressive fighter. But they're training him like a boxer. So that's the kind of things where it doesn't. You don't transfer over into a great trainer when you can't make adjustments.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. So is this we've heard it across the board. Andy Foster said, if this turns into a real fight, we're going to stop it. If anybody looks like they're going all out, we're going to slow it down. They want to see a glorified sparring match. Is this, or
see? This is where it's so hard because I've heard that, and I'm just kind of like, they ruined that because that approach they've ruined because they've put in judges in it. If you put you go back and you see Mike Tyson fight Corey Sanders.
Yes.
Corey Sanders.
Yeah, when he has to hold him up.
An exhibition.
When he hits him with the right hand. He hits him with the right hand and then holds him, keeps him from falling.
Yeah, he knocked him down in the first round, and that was with headgear on. Okay, so now, and they didn't have judges for that one. That was classified as an exhibition. And hey, they were following like exhibitionist rules where there is no headgear. Where there was headgear, where there was no judges. Now with
16-ounce gloves.
Yeah, 16-ounce gloves. This one is 12-ounce gloves, no headgear, 8 rounds, and judges. Yeah. So what are both guys supposed to do? They're both guys with this tremendous pride, tremendous ego, legacy, self-esteem, competitors. Two of the greatest competitors ever. They're going to mutually try not to win. The judges tally. These judges are going to judge this fight, and they're both going to mutually try to one's not going to try to, who's going to not try to win that decision? Who's going to try to not win? Who's not going to be? How are they going to make this agreement that neither one of them are going to go that hard, and then they're going to have to live with a decision that people can debate forevermore on who would have won in their prime and who won that fight. So it's very hard for me to understand how that makes sense because, the 12-ounce gloves is only 2 more ounces than the 10s.
Which is,
they fight in 10s in heavyweight.
Which makes no difference.
The only thing they made different. Yeah, it's not much difference.
People don't realize what's the difference between a 10-ounce glove and a 12-ounce glove.
Not much.
No.
Not much. It's not like 16, and 10. So you got that situation. And then the only thing that they changed any different was that originally it was supposed to be a 3-minute round fight.
Right.
Now it's went to a 2-minute round fight. Right. So that kind of does something there, but like who it favors can be argued. But at the same time,
it almost seems like the 2-minute round will almost create more of an urgency,
Exactly.
Which also plays into it being more full out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, for me, it doesn't, it's not something it's going to be very, very hard for me to see this thing not break out into a very competitive fight. I just don't see, and I think, Mike only has one speed. For the most part, what is he going to do? Box Roy Jones? Yeah. He's going to box Roy Jones. He's going to box Roy Jones. Yeah. He has to put the pressure on. He has to, even if it's like you're not going all out, you still just put judges in this and made this fight be judged. If they wanted to make it an exhibition, they'd have took the judges out of it. Right. You know what I mean? If they just wanted it to be exhibition mentality in there. But you got guys who are 2 of the greatest fighters that ever lived. Yeah. That you got guys that are the ultimate competitors, and you're putting him in there, and you're telling them someone's going to judge this fight, and they're mutually, or they're one or the other supposed to be the less of a competitor and say, okay, well, I'm not going to go that hard. I don't want to hurt because we're not supposed to go that hard. But there's going to be at the end of this, someone decide who's a winner. I just don't understand the concept. But being with the 12-ounce gloves, you're fighting Mike Tyson. He's got one speed. We have to prepare.
Well, and they say the last thing that goes on a fighter is his power. So
is his power. You know what I mean? So, Roy's training like it's a fight. Yeah. Where he's trying to get in the best shape he could get in, and he's getting in great shape. He's sparring rounds like he's always sparred when I've trained him in the past for real fights. He's taking things serious. Trying to get his rest. you know, like I said, he works with, he's still training other fighters and things like that. But he has dedicated himself to being the best that he could be for this fight. So it's not something that he's taking lightly or coming in, like I said, with an exhibition mentality, because, you know, like I said, I don't know how that is supposed to happen with, you know, how do you trust the other side? I mean, Mike only has one speed, you know? So, I mean, it's just, it's going to end up having to be competitive. I think it's going to be as competitive as those two can be at this point in their career, which is, I still think, is at a very high level. Like, the mystery to me is Mike. I just don't know how good he is, you know? I can gauge where Roy was 10 years ago, where he's at now. He's still pretty darn good, man. Still pretty good. I mean, he's still able to compete with the young guys at a very, very competitive level, if not get the better of them. Is that still the story with Tyson? We don't know. But again, he has something that, like you said, last thing to go is power. He could be getting outboxed the whole night, you know, and land the one shot. You know, so we understand that, and we're preparing for that. You know, I mean, we're preparing not to let him land that one shot. I mean, he's always got that one punch power. I mean, he's proven that, and he's one of the greatest heavyweight punchers ever. I mean, arguably, people will say he's the greatest puncher. Him, Ernie Shavers, George Foreman, they're all in the argument, right, Doug?
Right.
And those are the three guys, you know. Well, I would say, I mean, who's your punchers in history, right? Those three?
Yeah, Shavers for
all
sure.
time?
Yeah.
Right.
Foreman. Foreman, Shavers. Yeah. Well, in any case,
Tyson.
From a fan standpoint, it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, two living legends in the ring together. Yeah.
And the undercard's supposed to be a pretty good undercard with some other, a couple fights that are real fights. And some YouTube stars are going to bring a lot of attention. That Jake Paul's going to be fighting Nate Robinson, the basketball player, which is kind of like so it's definitely you know, not just a fight card. It's an event.
Yeah, people are going to be tuning in for that. Yeah. Well,
so
Tom,
they're estimating like over 1 million buys the last time I seen.
I know. Well, I mean, it's good for boxing, you know.
For sure.
That kind of a spotlight on it, especially right now, while there's not a ton of boxing going on. You know, there's some and a healthy level, but not certainly what we're at before all this went down.
Yeah. I love that shirt you got,
Duran, it's a favorite. Well, Tom, you're a fantastic strategist, technician, and a true teacher, and we really miss that in the sport today, I think. So I wanted to direct everybody again to your YouTube channel and how they can follow you and watch what you got going on.
Yeah, I have a world-class boxing channel on YouTube. And then you can follow me on Instagram at Tom Yankello Boxing, and also Tom Yankello's World Class Boxing Gym on Facebook as well. And I really appreciate you having me on, Doug. And we go way back, man.
We do. Back in the day.
Always, I remember I did the pads. I did. They put me in the catalog with the pads.
You were in the catalog for sure.
We talked at my gym about 2001 already.
Yeah.
Like 19 years ago.
Time flies,
man. It does.
Well, whether you're a fight fan or just a fight enthusiast or actually in the sport, check out Tom's videos because there's something to be learned from him regardless. It'll make you smarter watching the fights. You'll understand the game better. And obviously, if you're a fighter, the things you can actually apply in competition. So make sure and check that out. Tom, again, thanks. Appreciate you. Thanks for taking the time. And
I appreciate you, bro.
Good luck later this month.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it, Doug.
We'll talk soon.
All right, have a good one.
Later. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Title Unboxed. If you're anything like me, you can never get too much boxing. So if you'd like to watch more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our Title Boxing YouTube page.